everyone, and welcome to Writer's Showcase. I'm your host, Christie Stratos, author of Anatomy of a Darkened Heart and Brotherhood of Secrets, and I am owner of my editing company, which you can find at proofpositivepro.com. This show is part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and support for this broadcast was provided by Claire McKinney PR. So today we are doing our first live Facebook interview, which is very exciting, with Douglas J. Wood, political thriller author, although he is actually multi-genre, and we will talk about that in a bit. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
I'm really excited about your latest release. It's called Dark Data, Control, Alt, Delete. And I, of course, immediately like the title. It's pretty clever, very interesting. It was released August 1st, I believe. So it's been out about a month. And it has been called a contemporary and cautionary tale. They say the most unsettling part is its believability. And I quote, "Wood scares the hell out of the reader." So you have to tell us about this book.
Yeah, I've practiced law now for over 40 years, and I've specialized in media law in that time frame, and so I've been through the evolution of the internet very firsthand, and dealt with a lot of the companies that are in that space. And this story in Dark Data talks about how we've all become addicted to social media, to our cell phones, to the internet, where we are sharing unbelievable amounts of data, knowingly and unknowingly, that is all being cultivated and manipulated and analyzed. And what this book does is it sort of takes us to the third step in what I would call the process. The first step is the collection of data and the sharing that we know is going on constantly. The second step in the process is the influence that is used by marketers, by anybody really, to influence your behavior, and we see that all the time, even today. I mean, when you go and you shop or you surf or whatever you're doing on the internet, you are influenced by it. Mm-hmm. And the third step, which this book talks about, is the next step and the final step, and that's control, where evil can take that data and eventually control you and make you do things subconsciously that you're not even aware you're doing. So the book talks, in the fictional side of it, talks about an alliance between a Russian oligarch financial terrorist, a Islamic radical terrorist, and a black hat hacker who teamed together to create all sorts of chaotic situations on the world, where the financial terrorist is able to play markets very aggressively, the radical terrorist is able to cause havoc in his own way, and the black hat hacker, she's able to infiltrate all sorts of things and have great influence on individuals, both in public life and in private life. The lesson of it really is and this is where I think it scares a lot of people, is when I write my stories, I try to write fiction that is plausible, if not probable, in my books. And I think where this resonates with folks is that it tells a very cautionary tale, as the one reviewer said, of what could happen and very well may happen if we do not try to figure out how we're going to control this addiction we have to sharing data in unprecedented ways. I mean, the stuff that people share is almost frightening at times. And unbeknownst to us, it's not just us sharing data about ourselves. It's also when everybody else shares data about you. It's all accumulated, all collected. Algorithms can analyze it faster than any human being can possibly analyze it. And they can, over time, according to authorities, not just speculation on my part, they can map out what's called a digital DNA. So that you effectively, if I understand your digital DNA, then in theory, I can control your behavior. So I can turn you into a terrorist and you don't even know it. And you won't be able to resist it. That's the theory behind all of this, that ultimately that's where this technology is leading. And when you sort of add on all the artificial intelligence fears and all these other things that you see out there, it's a scary tale. And I remember early on, when you may remember back when cloning was a big deal, and that somebody cloned a sheep, and everybody went crazy. The world went nuts, and they demanded controls on cloning, because otherwise we were going to produce monsters. And the world's reaction was pretty aggressive, the medical community, and they pretty much clamped down on it. So today we don't see much uncontrolled cloning and that kind of thing. Not true in artificial intelligence. That is proceeding apace with zero restraint, and no one knows where it could go. We have all these people prognosticating about the negatives of it. There are others who are prognosticating about wonderful things that will happen, but no one really knows. And in that whole process between sharing data, opening up our kimonos to unprecedented degrees, knowingly being influenced, and now next possibly being controlled, that's the story that this story tells in the context of a thriller environment.
Wow. There's so much going on with that today. I feel like there are more reveals every day. People like you probably know even more than the average person. You're doing actual research on this, maybe, regularly, maybe not even just for the book. And then there are, average people who just enjoy going on Facebook and they see something maybe on TV and some kind of reporting about sharing and privacy. And it's sort of an eye roll, not again type of thing. But you're actually revealing quite a lot more. So this is also a bit of a warning, would you say? Yeah,
absolutely. And I don't know that there's a solution. That my big concern is I'm not sure what the solution is, because we become so addicted to this. I mean, no one, if you were to assemble 100 people in a room and say, okay, everybody, raise your hands if you're willing to give up the internet. If anybody's answering honestly, no one's going to raise their hand. They can't live without it. It's become blend. The younger you are, the more addicted you are to it. It's amazing how today you can see a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, whatever, on a cell phone, and they know how to work it. That's the kind of addiction that ultimately, in terms of stifling real conversation and just turning it into the sharing of data. Imagine when that, not if it has already, but imagine when the bad actors who have access to this, have ability to implant in these kinds of things. I know it may sound a little crazy, but if you want to see this in a more scholarly analysis, you can go on the web and type in selfish ledger. It's a video that Google released a couple of 3 years ago that talks about this so-called selfish gene, and that the selfish gene in our our DNA. The selfish gene is something that has been a concept for hundreds of years. And it essentially says that in our inner cells, in the species that we are, in any species, there are genes that are there to make sure that that species propagates and survives. And you cannot stop that gene from doing whatever it's going to do. And if you watch The Selfish Ledger and you read my book, it's premised on the theory that you can control that selfish gene. And when you can, then you take free will away from individuals.
Wow, that sounds amazing. That's something I'm definitely going to look into. I'd like to know more about that. So would you say that you do this kind of research because it's hard to say you enjoy it, but at the same time, it is fascinating. Things that you're talking about are
kind of a sick way to enjoy stuff, I suppose. I just find these kinds of things, the unintended consequences. As a lawyer, I deal with unintended consequences all the time. Two clients or a client and somebody else will do something they think is great, and it is great, and then something goes awry, and some unintended consequence occurs where they need some counsel or advice from a lawyer. It's not unlike any. There's lots of things that's true in lots of professions, the unintended consequence, and so anything that has an interesting unintended consequence aspect to it fascinates me. And in this context, the unintended consequence, despite all the really wonderful things that the internet and social media and these platforms provide to us, has an unintended consequence that has attracted some very serious criminals. Now, today, these are not theoretical individuals. They are very real, and they are manipulating your data. They're trying to influence you. They're stealing from you. They're doing all sorts of things. We all kind of know that, but we either ignore it or choose not to deal with it, and in the context of that, fail to focus on how to really stop it. It's almost as if we accept the crime. We know we're going to get phished. We know we're going to get hacked. We know we're going to get the junk mail. We know we're going to get all this stuff that we don't want. We know that there are bots floating around that are, non-human traffic on the internet. We know all of this, and we seem to accept it. Where if we were in the offline world, if there were robots walking around the streets and impersonating us, and if there were crooks walking around pulling, your wallet out of your pocket, we would never tolerate that. Yet in the online world, we seem to not tolerate it, but seem to be unable to do anything about it because of this addiction that we have. And I don't know that you can ever solve this addiction because we're so stuck in it, and it's getting bigger and bigger and more powerful every day. So maybe I like to scare myself. I'm not sure what it is, but there's that's what I like to look into and research.
I do. Yeah, it's really scary because the thought of course, without being on the internet, there are so many things that we couldn't do. Communication might be harder, and then research for books might be harder, things like that. It's certainly hard to give up, even for, what a lot of people are more interested in the social aspect now. But those aspects are just as important. And a lot of times children end up falling in the crosshairs a bit, and there are a lot of children who don't understand why their information is being asked for example. And I think there's either a suit or something like that going on against YouTube and maybe one other big giant right now for that kind of thing, again, about children.
Let me make a comment on that.
Yeah,
I think that people need to understand. There are lawsuits up against some of these big players. Those big players do not have in their hearts bad behavior. They may, that's an unintended consequence of what they do. They don't mean to do it. If they could solve it, they would not, try to steal information from children. They would not try to have your data breached. They take the measures they can, but they're dealing with such large numbers that it's very hard for them to do. I laud the efforts that some of these companies at least try. They're not the bad guys. The bad guys are the true hardcore criminals that are out there, many of whom are based in Eastern Europe and elsewhere, where they're lawless. They can hack into they can come right into the internet. It's very easy to do. They plant bots, they call bots or robots, into the internet. My computer sitting right now and your computer there has bots in it as we speak. They're virtually impossible to stop. The question is how they execute those bots and what they do and how they steal from you, etc. Those are the ones who you can't even find to sue them. I mean, even if you wanted to sue them, you couldn't find them. So I think it's good that there's a lot of this stuff being questioned, whether it's Facebook or Google or whoever it is. It should be questioned. I think that they're generally responsible companies who want to solve these problems, but the crook loves it when that happens because it's taking the focus away from them. So it's making the guy. It's making someone who wants to be a good guy but has challenges in being the good guy, the absolute bad guy. And so the real bad guys get away with it more and more. So yeah, every once in a while you'll hear the FBI has done a bust on some botnet and other things that are out there. But it's just a drop in the bucket. It's just drop. I had a friend of mine who's a very astute computer scientist and deals with educating companies on how to deal with hackers and deal with security breaches at a very, very high level. And he once told me that we probably cannot win this battle because as good as the programmers we have that we bring to the fight, the criminals will bring better ones because they pay them more. And it's a harsh reality when you think about it, because it's a never-ending fight, and the crooks have really good programmers and hackers whose day in, day out is trying to figure out what your latest protective measure was. They figure it out after a while, and then you got to come up with another one. So it's a never-ending battle that ultimately is not properly monitored, if you will, or not properly addressed by the traditional authorities that ought to be addressing these kinds of things. They're trying to, but it's really hard to get jurisdiction. It's really hard to find these people. It's hard to follow the money. There's all sorts of things going on that people just don't begin to understand. I mean, I won't even get into the aspects of the dark web. I mean, that's a whole another world that is there, and people seem to think that, well, the dark web must be someplace over there. I'm not on it. I don't know anything about it. Well, guess what? We're all on it. It's just a matter of what part of that is being mined in connection with what those criminals want and what some people want. So it's a very frightening arena, and that's hopefully. Yeah, I hope I do scare the hell out of people with this book.
Yeah, well, yeah. And I was just going to say, I can the more you talk about this, the more I understand why one of the reviewers said something about, really, you shouldn't read this late at night because it actually is going to freak you out.
You'll have sleepless nights. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is just.
That may not be a good idea. I hope people buy at least start to read it. I'm not sure that some of those reviews are great for sales or not.
No, I mean, for me, I like anything on the darker side. So for me, I mean, this sounds like something I would really enjoy. I like thrillers. I like anything dark fiction. So, I mean, I'm learning so much from you right now. I am not someone who knows a ton about this, but I kind of want to read your book now and learn a lot more. I know that it'll be interspersed with, there's probably a lot of fact, and then there's probably the fiction is really just the thriller aspect of it. Is that pretty much how it works?
Yeah, I mean, I use a lot of facts to then extrapolate into hopefully an enjoyable fictional tale that's a thriller, and it has a twist end, and if you write, as you know, I mean, you write, and then you just don't tell a linear tale with a logical ending. You've got to have some fun in it. You got to have some intrigue in it, some great characters, and that kind of stuff. So that's the really great creative side that I enjoy, where I take these facts that are plausible and real in many ways, and then try to weave that into an interesting tale that keeps the reader happy on the beach while they're watching the waves.
Right.
That's kind of the goal in writing these books like this is to just make sure, first and foremost, it's a really enjoyable read. It's fun to read, interesting to read, all those kinds of things. If you've achieved that, then you've succeeded. And then if you can double up on that and also tell a lesson in the process and caution in the process, then you've really achieved something.
Yeah, that's even better. I would say I don't write much mystery. I write more, I would say, psychological suspense. And so when I think about something like a thriller or a mystery, anything involving police or anything along those lines, the law, I often think that I prefer to I write Victorian era fiction. I like sticking back then because there was so much less technology. It was much harder for them to catch a criminal. To me, to write something like you're writing right now is very intimidating. What kind of advice would you have for somebody who's interested but also feels kind of intimidated by the kind of research you're talking about?
We're inherently curious beings, people, and you find where your comfort level is in your curiosity. So you find yours. I'm speculating, in the Victorian age when things were different and in your mind more comfortable. I find my comfort zone is in the unknown. And just speculating and letting my imagination go berserk in terms of that kind of stuff. And that's where I find my fun thing. All the genres that are out there, whether they're thrillers or bios or whatever they are, documentaries, is where someone finds their passion. So my advice wouldn't be necessarily to decide to go into my genre of the unknown, if you want to call it that, but first to find what it is in the creative process that gives you a passion. Where do you find an interest? And then to take a look at that and find ways you can tell tales around it. So you've got this, with its incredible, I could see where the Victorian era would be very fascinating with all its richness and its intrigue and its, family stuff going on and all that kind of thing. Could really, there's some great stories from the Victorian age, and there's wonderful stories from 20th century too. So it's just finding that passion is what I advise people to do. Because people that come to me, I'm sure they come to you, how do I get started? And I always say, well, you already probably did start because you asked the question. Is something in your mind that you want to talk about? There's something you want to write about. What is it, and why is it that you have a passion for it? And if you do that, then you start the painful process, as you know. That this is not something you do because you think you're going to feel good right away.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it's a lot of, there's a certain amount of pain, particularly when the editors get a hold of it, that you have to, go through. But the journey is worth it if you persevere through it.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is not like an immediate satisfaction type of thing. Although it does feel wonderful sometimes when you write a scene you like, even if it's not perfect. But your advice is very good. Yeah, you have already started. If you've already begun thinking through that idea, something that you're passionate about or interested in, that's a great point. So how long would something like Dark Data, how long did that take you to write?
A little under a year. The research was probably 6 months, around there. I mean, I do a lot of research, and it's largely because I can't help myself. I'm trained for that. I mean, that's what my education's about. So I sometimes get really often a little too deep in the research, but that's just, I can't help myself. And then I begin to write. And the writing process is, 3 months, 4 months, whatever it is. And then we go from there.
Wow, that's outstanding. Wow. I would love to write in that amount of time. That's kind of, I think my first book worked that way, and no other book has since, which is very irritating.
The very first novel I wrote, this is no joke, took me 17 years to write.
Did it?
I just couldn't get my creative juice. I couldn't make it happen, and it just didn't seem to work. And then a spark happened, where things happen politically, because the first 3 novels about this fictitious character named Samantha Harrison who becomes president of the United States, and they're political thrillers. And suddenly I realized that, hey, there's a real good shot that a woman's going to become president of the United States. So if I'm going to do this, I better do it. Otherwise, it's going to be too late. So I was motivated. And so the first book took, each took about a year. Of the 3 books, each one took about a year to write. But yeah, I mean, my cycle tends to be about a year.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you brought us to an interesting question I wanted to ask you, because I know, like you said, the Samantha Harrison trilogy is 3 books.
Right.
Political thrillers. They're also political thrillers. I wanted to know if you thought that, since we're in a highly charged political state, we don't, of course, need to get into politics or anything, but we are in a highly charged political climate. Do you think that political thrillers are more appealing to readers now? Or, is it just sort of fascination that's, that would drive them to pick up a political thriller? Some people are getting worn out on politics in general, but at the same time, thriller is very different.
Yeah, I don't think people really ever get worn out on politics. I mean, there's such a passionate thing that people have for it on whatever, side of the spectrum or middle of the spectrum that they are. So they love to talk about it. So my belief is that if there's something people really like to talk about, because it occupies their day, it means they have an interest factor. It means that it probably is something that they like to read about too. So that if you can take that passion that they have, and when I wrote the Samantha Harrison books, I tried to did a ton of research again. I tried to understand the passions of the left and the right and the moderate, and to find a way of creating a character that was complex, flawed, from when she graduates high school to when she finishes her presidency, and all the things in politics that flow through that, all the tragedies, all the challenges, all the compromises, and all this kind of stuff, because that's what people talked about. There's not a politician on earth where you're not going to find somebody to say they're a liar, they're a cheat, they're this, and the same person will be described by somebody else as a great person, a wonderful leader. Yeah, there's such a diversity of opinion on everyone in politics by smart people. People I respect a lot, have diametrically opposite viewpoints of the very same person. So I think that kind of inherent tension that exists is why I think thrillers in general, and political thrillers as well, I think they do well. As far as I know, they do well. I'm not privy to the actual statistics, but I know that if you look at the movies that you see all the time, there's politics, and it's either superheroes, saving the day, which has all its politics in there too, or it's some kind of spy thing or whatever it is. It's always something, if you look at it, that people are talking about, thinking about.
Yeah.
So I think that there's still a good deal of viability in that genre. So that's why I moved on to what I did in dark data, and because the thing that everybody's talking about now, with Cambridge Analytica and some of the other things that have happened in the marketplace, they're talking about privacy, they're talking about breaches, and they're talking about all sorts of things and the evils of social media and what it's doing to our society. So that's what they're talking about, and then I decided I'd write a thriller around that after I did research into various things.
So how did your legal background, I'm sure your legal background must have played a part. I know it's played a part in, I'm sure, the last 3 books of Samantha Harrison. But what about dark data? How did your legal background play into that? I'm sure it did.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, if the worst thing that a lawyer can do is watch things like CSI and LA Law or any of these TV shows that are on lawyers, because everything that happens on there just isn't true. I mean, it's not how it works, but it's drama, and it's entertaining, and it's entertaining, informing and entertaining. Right. So when I write a book, when I write whether it's the Samantha Harrison series or Dark Data, I have to, in some degree, suspend all of the sort of the complex, very boring legal theories that exist, and you have to trying to make a pig look really beautiful, which is really hard to do, because it's still a pig in the end of the day. So, but when you're writing in that context, the law side of it, I always have some legal issues in the books because I'm comfortable talking about those kinds of things. But I do take some degree of creative license with it. But I do try to, particularly in the Samantha Harrison series, create, how does the law deal with these kinds of things? And in Dark Data, I talk about legal issues as well, in terms of some of the market manipulations, but you have to be very careful because you can get bogged down in very minute detail that is frankly really boring, and no one. I may think it's important that you understand something, because I think it's important, when in fact it's totally unimportant, and you don't need to know it in order to follow the story. So sometimes the legal is as positive as it is for my research that I do and how helpful it is there, it can sometimes get in the way of the entertainment side. And in the end of the day, you're trying to write a book that's going to be entertaining. Otherwise, if not, go right for the encyclopedia. It's not going to be what people want to read.
But you do have an actual memoir that has your legal background, and it's called, you introduced it?
Asshole Attorney.
There we go. I love it.
Yeah, I wrote that before I wrote Dark Data, and I've been doing this for 40 years now, and I've been a media entertainment lawyer that entire time. So I've had the privilege of crossing paths with some really bizarre people and getting involved in some really strange stuff all over the world. So someone said to me one time, you ought to write about that stuff. It's interesting. I said, come on, it's just, who's going to be Carol, what I've done. But Claire, my publisher, then urged me to say, yeah, do it. So I did it, and it's done well. It's won awards and stuff, and people think it's funny because it was written to be funny. I didn't try to get too serious about it. So because that would be very boring too. I can't imagine why someone would want to sit and read I woke up this morning, I read a brief, and I filed it into the court. I mean, that's not going to exactly sell books. So I tried to talk a little bit about myself and a little bit about my experience as a lawyer and some of the crazy clients I've had. I've had some really bizarre clients in my career who are really interesting characters, and I talk a lot about them and some of the insane stuff. I was in a helicopter crash once. I was escaped out of a country once. I mean, that sounds bizarre, but that's really what I actually did. So I went ahead and told it, and people apparently find it interesting. So that's great. I'm happy that they enjoy it.
I think my Christmas list is going to be loaded with Douglas Wood books. Too many interesting things.
Fill the stocking. Go ahead for it.
Exactly. So we're just about out of time now, but I know it's slightly off topic, but you are multi-genre, and I did just want to bring up the fact that you have these other books that are, I think it's 3 books, 101 Things I'd Like to Say to My, and it's, one of your children.
Right.
And so I'm
There
sorry?
were three separate, no, I was going to tell you, very quickly, there were three separate books of advice, parental advice, usually one-liners or maybe a paragraph. Could be stuff that you always want to say to your kid, but you probably never got a chance to say to it or forgot to say it. So I wrote one first for my one daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Then I wrote 101 things for my son. And then my third daughter, my last of three children, said, "Where's mine?" And I said, "Damn, I got to write 101 more things." I ran out of 202. So anyway, I wrote 101 more, and they're all in one collection of 303 things. And some of it's, funny. Some of it's the beginning. The one to my one daughter, the first one, is more humor than anything else. The last one to my youngest daughter, and the last one I wrote, talks about some really tough issues. Death, divorce, siblings, and all sorts of things, prejudice, and everything else. So it's a little more serious, but again, people seem to like it, and the kids liked it. I never intended to publish those, but all three of the kids said, "You've got to do this," because my friends who have read it think it's interesting and fun to read. So,
Sure.
Okay, that's what you want me to do. That's what I'll do. So that's what I did. Then there's also the extremely exciting first book I wrote, which is Please Be Advised: The Advertising Executive's Legal Reference Guide. A real page turner, because it's the area of the law that I represent, that I practice. And I unless you really are a very sick advertising executive, buy one of my other books.
Well, it's great that you are capable of writing all these different genres, though. That's always wonderful to see in an author and to be able to pick different things. But right now, Dark Data is your latest. It sounds absolutely fantastic. And, thank you so much for being here on the show, Douglas. So can you, judging by Dark Data, you probably aren't on too many social platforms, but tell us where we can find you after the show.
Yeah, no, I'm on Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm all those things. I'm as addicted as anybody else is. I'm not.
Okay.
It's kind of like AA. You walk and you say, "Hi, my name's Doug. I'm alcoholic." Well, I think everyone out there has to say, "Hi, my name's Doug. I'm addicted to social media." I mean, I'm not going to deny it. In fact, it's almost like I know a little bit too much, and so I have a little more of a guilt factor when I'm on it, because I know what I'm doing to myself. It's crazy. But no, I'm on all of those, and the books are on bookstores and in Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Apple, and, so they're available all over the place. So great. Yeah, I'm out there. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm very happy to, have a conversation.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us on Writers Showcase. This has been a copyrighted podcast owned by the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network and Creative Edge Marketing. Our next interviews are going to include September 17th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to have James Jennings, author of Mirador. September 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern. That's going to be with Ed Willett. Very excited to talk to him again. He's a fantasy and sci-fi author, another multi-genre. He does more than that as well. And on September 25th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we have Tosca Lee, award-winning multi-genre author. It'll be great to catch up with her. We will be having a panel sometime this month, so watch this Facebook page. We'll announce it as soon as we've got it organized. Just check our Facebook page for updates on our next interview, and we will see you in our next episode. Thank you.